At St. Peter's High School, everyone knew Amaka was not a normal student. She was funny, strange, and sometimes just too scary. The way she laughed could make a baby stop crying and a dog forget how to bark. It wasn't just her laugh, her actions were even weirder. The teachers and school staff still had no idea what was happening. They just knew that weird things always seemed to happen when Amaka was around, but they could never prove anything. The students, however, had figured it out. Amaka had powers, and they could use them. It all started one afternoon when a group of boys were hungry, but they had no money to buy snacks. One of them, Chinedu, had an idea. He whispered to Amaka, "Amaka, please help us. We need something to eat." Amaka smiled. "What do you want?" "Meat pie," Chinedu said. Amaka laughed, stretched her hand towards the school canteen from across the field, and, just like that, she pulled out a tray of hot meat pies. The boys stared in shock. "You are a legend!" Chinedu shouted as they grabbed the meat pies and ran behind the classroom to eat. From that day, Amaka became the school's secret supplier of free food. Whenever students were hungry, they just whispered to Amaka, and within seconds, she would pull out whatever they wanted from the kitchen, the canteen, or even from the staff room. One day, the principal walked into his office and found his breakfast missing. He looked at his empty plate in confusion. "I just put my bread and tea here," he shouted. Meanwhile, outside, Amaka and her friends were sitting under a tree, enjoying the same bread and tea. The teachers started noticing that food was disappearing mysteriously. The cook at the kitchen complained, "I don't understand. I serve food, but before students even eat, it disappears." The principal called for a meeting with the staff. "There is a thief in this school, and we must find them." The students, of course, knew the truth, but they kept quiet, pretending to be just as confused as the teachers. One day, the students decided to take things further. They wanted to see how far Amaka could go. They convinced her to disturb the teachers and the school staff for fun. During an English lesson, while the teacher, Mrs. Johnson, was writing on the board, Amaka snapped her fingers. Suddenly, the chalk in the teacher's hand disappeared. Mrs. Johnson looked at her hand in shock. "Where is my chalk?" She took another piece of chalk. As soon as she tried to write, that one disappeared too. The students struggled to hold their laughter. Mrs. Johnson turned to the class looking confused. "Who is playing games?" Nobody answered. She took a third piece of chalk, and before she could touch the board, it vanished again. Now, the students couldn't hold it anymore. They burst into laughter. "Who is responsible for this nonsense?" Mrs. Johnson shouted. But before she could continue, the duster flew out of her hand and landed in the dustbin. Mrs. Johnson screamed and ran out of the classroom. Another time, the students convinced Amaka to play tricks on the school gatekeeper, Baba Tunde. Baba Tunde was an old man who took his job very seriously. He always sat by the gate watching students carefully to make sure nobody sneaked out of school. One afternoon, while Baba Tunde was sitting in his chair, Amaka whispered something, and his chair slowly slid away from him. At first, he didn't notice, but when he tried to sit down, the chair was gone. He fell straight to the ground. "Yee! My back!" Baba Tunde shouted. The students watching from a distance burst into laughter. Baba Tunde stood up, confused. "Who took my chair?" Amaka giggled, and suddenly the chair appeared right in front of him. He scratched his head. "I need to stop drinking that herbal tea in the morning," he muttered. The students kept finding new ways to have fun with Amaka's powers. They asked her to make things disappear, make teachers' voices sound funny, and even move objects around the school. One day, during assembly, while the principal was making a long speech about discipline, Amaka yawned. "I'm tired of this speech," she whispered to her friend. Her friend Funka laughed. "Do something." Amaka smiled. Suddenly, the principal's microphone started floating in the air. The students gasped. The principal, unaware, continued speaking, but then the microphone slowly moved away from his mouth. He tried to grab it, but it moved higher. He jumped, trying to reach it. The students were dying of laughter. "Who is controlling this microphone?" the principal shouted. The teachers looked around, confused. "Sir, we don't know." The microphone then flew out of the principal's hands and landed in the crowd of students. The students exploded with laughter. The principal, now angry, shouted, "We need prayers in this school!" But before he could finish, his cap disappeared from his head. Now, even the teachers were starting to look worried. One of the teachers whispered, "Sir, maybe it's a spirit." The principal, now sweating, said, "Call the pastor. We must pray for this school." The students, knowing Amaka was responsible, laughed even harder. On their way home, the students kept discussing the funny things Amaka could do. Some of them started making bets on what she should do next. One of the boys, Tunde, said, "Amaka, can you make a car disappear?" Amaka shrugged. "Maybe." They all gasped. Another girl, Ada, said, "Can you make someone's shoes disappear while they are walking?" Amaka smiled. "Let's find out." Just ahead of them, a man was walking while carrying a basket of groceries. Amaka giggled, and suddenly, his shoes disappeared from his feet. The man stopped, confused. "Where are my shoes?" he shouted. The students ran away laughing. The more Amaka did, the more powerful she seemed to become. One night, while she was at home, she decided to test her own limits. She looked in the mirror and whispered, "Can I disappear?" Suddenly, she was gone. She looked around. She was nowhere. Then she whispered again, "Let me come back." And just like that, she reappeared. She grinned. This was just the beginning. The following day at St. Peter's High School, the air was thick with tension. The school was buzzing with the news of the upcoming general school prayers, and students were still whispering about the floating incident. Many of them were excited, some were nervous, while others just wanted to see if the prayers would truly chase away spirits. The principal, Mr. Okonkwo, looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. His forehead was permanently wrinkled, and his eyes darted around as if expecting something strange to happen at any moment. At the morning assembly, he stood before the students, gripping the microphone tightly as though it would fly out of his hand if he let go. "Students, today we will be distributing letters to take home. You must give them to your parents without fail," he announced. "This prayer session is very important for the future of this school." He glanced at the crowd, his gaze lingering on Amaka, who stood with her usual amused expression. He swallowed hard. Something about that girl made him uneasy. Was she involved in these strange events? He wasn't sure, but he wasn't ready to find out the hard way. As the teachers handed out letters, each student received one. But when it was Amaka's turn, the principal personally walked over and handed her a special letter. "This one is for your father," he said, watching her closely. "Make sure he gets it." Amaka looked at the letter, then at the principal, and a slow smile spread across her lips. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure he reads every word," she said sweetly, tucking the letter into her bag. The principal shuddered slightly and turned away. After the assembly, Amaka met up with her two closest friends, Fonka and Tunde, and they wasted no time in running to their secret hiding spot behind the old classroom block. The moment they were out of sight, Amaka eagerly ripped open the envelope and pulled out the neatly folded letter. She unfolded it and began to read aloud, her eyes widening with every sentence. "Dear Pastor Elijah, we are writing to invite you to St. Peter's High School for a special prayer session. Strange events have been happening, and we believe that this school needs spiritual cleansing. Yesterday, several students were seen floating in the air during assembly. Teachers and staff have witnessed unexplained events, and we fear that something beyond human understanding is at work. We believe your presence will bring peace and restoration to the school. Please come prepared to cast out any spirits causing disturbances. We trust in your ability to deliver the school from these mysterious occurrences. We humbly request your presence on Friday at 10 a.m. for the general school prayers. Yours sincerely, Principal Okonkwo. By the time Amaka reached the last sentence, she was howling with laughter. She bent over, holding her stomach, tears streaming down her face. Funk and Tunda stared at her in shock. "What's so funny?" Funk asked, puzzled. Amaka gasped for air. They think this school is possessed. They wrote to my father like he's coming to fight demons." She wiped her eyes, shaking her head. "And the funniest part? They don't even know that I am the cause of all this." Tunda smirked, shaking his head. "Amaka, you are truly something else." Amaka folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. "I have to show my father this. He's going to love it." She took off running, leaving her friends laughing behind her. When Amaka reached home, her father, Pastor Elijah, was sitting in his usual spot, a tall and imposing figure flipping through the pages of a large book. His eyes were deep and sharp, and despite his reputation as a man of God, there was something unsettling about him. Amaka had known since childhood that her father was no ordinary pastor. In public, he was respected as a deliverance minister, a man who could cast out demons and cleanse evil spirits. But behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. He was a senior devil worshiper, a man who played both sides, serving the dark forces while pretending to be a savior of light. Amaka grinned wickedly as she dropped the letter in front of him. "Papa, the school has officially invited you to perform miracles," she said, unable to contain her amusement. Pastor Elijah slowly picked up the letter and read it. As his eyes moved across the words, a knowing smile curled at the corner of his lips. He folded the letter neatly and set it down. "Interesting," he murmured. Amaka sat across from him, drumming her fingers on the table. "So, are you going—" Pastor Elijah leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Of course. A man of God never refuses a call for help." He smirked slightly. "But tell me, my daughter, what exactly have you been up to at that school?" Amaka tilted her head, pretending to look innocent. "Papa, me? I've just been having fun." Her father chuckled darkly. "Fun? Students floating? Objects disappearing? Teachers losing their minds?" He nodded slowly. "That's not just fun, that's power." Amaka's eyes gleamed. "And I've barely even started." Pastor Elijah studied her for a long moment, then leaned forward. "You are special, Amaka. You know that, don't you?" She nodded. "I do." "There is great potential in you," he said smoothly. "But power without control is like a wildfire. It destroys everything in its path. If you want to keep playing your little games, that's fine. But you must be careful. Do not expose too much too soon." Amaka smirked. "Oh, don't worry, Papa. I know exactly what I'm doing." Her father chuckled again, then grew serious. "This school prayer meeting?" He tapped the letter. "They want to cleanse the school, drive out the spirits, remove whatever force they think is disturbing them." He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. "They have no idea that the spirit they want to remove is standing right in front of them." Amaka laughed. "Exactly. What will you do, Papa? Will you pretend to cast out the evil spirits while I stand there watching?" Pastor Elijah's eyes darkened slightly. "Oh, I will do more than pretend." Amaka's laughter slowed. "What do you mean?" Her father leaned in closer. "I have an idea, my dear, one that will make this school prayer session a day to remember." Amaka felt a shiver of excitement run down her spine. "Tell me more." Pastor Elijah's smile widened. "First, you will continue behaving as if nothing unusual is happening. Act normal. Let them think their plan is working, and when the time is right—" His eyes gleamed. "We will show them what true power looks like." Amaka licked her lips. I like the sound of that. Her father reached into his robe and pulled out a small black charm, glowing faintly in his hand. Take this. Keep it with you until Friday. It will ensure that nothing interferes with our plan. Amaka took the charm, feeling its strange warmth pulse in her palm. She closed her fingers around it and smiled. This is going to be fun. Pastor Elijah nodded. Indeed. St. Peter's High School is about to witness something they will never forget. As Amaka sat back, twirling the charm between her fingers, she couldn't help but wonder just how far this game could go. Friday arrived, and St. Peter's High School was filled with an unusual silence. The students were in class, but their minds were not on their lessons. Everyone knew that today was the general school prayer, and Pastor Elijah, Amaka's father, was coming. The teachers were tense, the principal was sweating more than usual, and even Baba Tunde, the gatekeeper, sat at his post, clutching a Bible, mumbling prayers under his breath. By mid-morning, the parents started arriving. Some of them looked excited, hoping the prayers would put an end to the strange events in the school. Others were nervous, unsure of what exactly was going on. A few whispered among themselves, recalling the stories they had heard. Floating students, objects disappearing, teachers running out of classrooms screaming. Many of them were wondering, are we truly safe here? The school hall was arranged neatly, with chairs set up in rows for the parents. The principal and staff welcomed them politely, showing them their seats. Parents greeted each other, some chatting about their children, others muttering about how important this prayer was. But as they waited for Pastor Elijah to arrive, something strange happened.